Welcome, Aleksandra Svetski, to the Larpar show, where we talk about what is money, what is coming, and how to protect your family. Alexandra is the author of the UnCommunist Manifesto, the founder of the Bitcoin Times publication, and Amber, the world's first Bitcoin DCA app. He also writes for Bitcoin Magazine. He runs a podcasting as well called At the Wake Up podcast. He has a new book being released soon. But despite the title, The Bushido of Bitcoin, it's not really a book about Bitcoin, but more about virtue. Yeah. So he's Bitcoin's merely provides a solid and honest base layer for civilization. The book is about the sort of qualities and behaviors future leaders will have to embody and practice once uh, shit hits the fan so that we can rebuild a life, affirming civilization from the ashes of clown world. So, Alexander, how did you find Bitcoin and how has it changed your life?
Thanks for the intro, man. I found Bitcoin. I think we all have a couple of touch points. My original touch point was I was a gold and silver bug in 2010, 2011, 2012, and I'm I still can't remember who I heard it from. It was probably Max Kaiser, jumping up and down on a couch or something like that. But I'd heard about it then, and I ignored it because I was a gold and silver guy. I had come out of the GFC with a lot of lessons. I was young. I taught myself to trade, and I basically lost everything and more. I margined myself up to the hilt, and it was a disaster. And that's sort of what sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to understand um, what is it about the monetary and economic system that is broken. And that's where I first discovered sort of the basis of Austrian economic thinking, I guess, and particularly through the gold bug lens. So I was definitely listening to a whole lot of Mike Maloney at the time, Doug Casey, all these kinds of people, Max Kaiser, etc. Um, and yeah, so I ignored Bitcoin the first time, and didn't really hear about it again until 2015, 2016, when a friend at the time, he was this sort of like degenerate basically, who was let's just say buying stuff with Bitcoin. And he started, telling me about it. He's like, oh, my friend just made, can't remember, it was like some ridiculous amount of money, like $1 million or something like that with this thing called Bitcoin. I was like, oh, is that thing still around? And I remember like the first time I'd heard about it, it was like single digits or double digits or something like that. And when he was telling me it was like triple digits, and I thought, Jesus Christ, what's going on here? So I dug in, and I originally like the initial motivation for me, and I think this is the same for most people, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. I came to Bitcoin to make money. I was like, oh, I can make money out of this. And then I guess maybe this doesn't apply to everyone, but at least for me it applied, and I know for many others it has, is you start digging down the rabbit hole and you find a new paradigm for life, a new paradigm for the world, a new paradigm for society, for civilization, for all these sorts of things. And yeah, I started going down that journey, and very much devoted both my personal and professional life to it. So in a personal capacity, I became this sort of like Bitcoin maximalist evangelist in Australia. I was one of the first ones in Australia, and pioneered like Bitcoin only meetups, talking about Bitcoin, writing about Bitcoin. I started writing on Medium, and then that's how I ended up writing for Bitcoin Magazine and all this sort of stuff. And I think I've done like 2 million words on Bitcoin, all over the web, zero hedge, all of it, right? And then in a professional capacity, I set out to build a product which was called Amber. And the idea was to build a dollar cost averaging. It was the first Bitcoin only dollar cost averaging app in the world. And it inspired Relay, Swan, like all the other apps that came after it. Like we were the first ones to do it. Everyone thought we were crazy. They're like, what about Ethereum? Why don't you have Dash? Where's your ICO? Are you going to do a coin? We're like, no, it's Bitcoin only. It's about saving in Bitcoin. And we did that. It was a tough ride. I left the business a couple years ago, and since then focused primarily on writing. And these days I'm building a new product that is more in the Nostr and social space, and it's about building basically a social network for sovereign individuals. And I'm kind of like preempting where the world's going to go. So anyway, that's a bit about my journey, a bit about Bitcoin, and it definitely like came to guide both my personal and professional life in many ways.
All right, very good, very good. Yeah, and as you mentioned there, a lot of people do come to Bitcoin about looking at the price and thinking that its number go up. Yeah, but as we all know, Bitcoin changes us all. Yeah, over time. Yeah. And regarding your other book, the Uncommunist Manifesto, yeah, what was your driving inspiration behind writing that? And how does its messaging contrast, say, with traditional views of communism and capitalism, especially in today's economic landscape?
Yeah, I mean that book started off as a bit of a joke actually. So it was myself and Mark Moss who wrote it, and we were in El Salvador before Bitcoin became legal tender, and he had he was on a bit of a rampage, like reading short political and economic books, so things like Anatomy of the State or The Law by Bastiat, and he'd also read the Communist Manifesto, and he asked me, he's like, Svetsky's like, have you ever read the Communist Manifesto? I said, why the fuck would I do that? And he said, it's so bad. And I said, I'm sure it is. I said, I don't want to give myself brain damage by reading it. And he said something offhand. He's like, oh, someone should write a book, kind of refuting the Communist Manifesto, kind of like, same sort of length. And anyway, 6 months later, I think things had changed for me with Amber, and I decided to get more into writing. So I rang up Mark and I said, you know what you said back then about the book? I was like, do you want to hit it? And he's like, yeah, I've got some time over the next couple of weeks. So we both flew into Austin. We got a big Airbnb, and we just like locked ourselves in the room for a week and just started writing. And originally it was a bit of a rebuttal, but in the end, the book sort of took on its own life, and it became a what we kind of call a message for hope, liberty, responsibility, like kind of something different. Because you look at the Communist Manifesto, it's a call for victimhood, for irresponsibility, for envy, for resentment, and for control, right? So we wrote something different, and I mean the whole book is diametrically opposed to the concept of communism and everything that's come from that, right? And I guess the only thing we really emulated was the length and the format. So it is a short book. The Communist Manifesto, I think, is 7,000 words. We're about like 8.5, 9,000 words. So it's a quick read. It's like you can read it in less than 2 hours. And yeah, it just sort of gives you a it's kind of like taking all of the big ideas from Mises, Rothbard, Hopper, Bitcoiners, all this sort of stuff, and putting it into like four easy to read chapters that anybody can understand, anybody can relate to. One of the key things in there, you mentioned something about capitalism. So we we frame capitalism as just an organic process, not a political modality. So we say, look, if capital is uh, resources, energy, and time, then capitalism is the process of using resources, energy, and time in the most effective and efficient way possible. So with that frame of reference, capitalism is not a political modality. It is just what life seeks to do, and it is what we all should seek to do. Like it's almost biological in that sense. Now, to the extent that capitalism is a political modality, uh, it's the question is how related it is to, or how well it maps onto that organic process. So that's kind of like the one of the big strong lessons in there. There's a bunch of other lessons in there, but essentially the idea is like to give people a primer on Austrian economics, etc. And it became a very effective. I know many people have used it as an orange pilling book because it's not about Bitcoin, but it makes the case for a better, more functional, more stable, more free, liberal, I shouldn't say liberal, libertarian world. And it does so on the basis that a sound money like Bitcoin exists. So it presupposes that. So when people read it, they come out thinking, oh shit, this Bitcoin thing is something more important, without us having to ram Bitcoin down someone's throat, because it's very hard. Like you give someone the Bitcoin standard, that they will go in there thinking, well, fuck off, I don't want to read about Bitcoin. But they sort of come into this book, they read it and they come out being more interested in Bitcoin, and then they can go to something like the Bitcoin Standard or whatever.
All right. Okay. Amazing. Amazing. And then I'm just wondering as well, in the book, okay, you focused heavily like on the importance of individual sovereignty. Yeah. And how do you see Bitcoin reinforcing this concept in the world that is increasingly leaning towards centralized control?
Yeah, I mean, responsibilities in Bitcoin's DNA, right? So you don't the modern paradigm is very much about outsourcing all sort of responsibility, right? And like I call it responsibility hot potato, basically. It's people trying to palm off any sort of responsibility. Oh, it's like my health. Oh, okay, whatever the experts tell me. Oh, my money. The banks own it. My education. Oh, the government and the schools own it, right? So it's like everything in society is designed to sort of like uh, off-board responsibility from the individual and place it in the hands of some institution, some government, some stupid body of experts or whatever, right? And it's come to the point where people are like, there's this great term called kidults, right? Like it's adults who are still fucking kids. And you see that all over the world. It's like people just haven't grown up. They're still children running around. Getting into their mid 30s, 40s, 50s, and they literally behave like children. And I think the true definition of an adult is when you get to the stage where you are responsible for yourself. And as I said, I think that that is severely lacking in the modern world. So to tie that back to like how Bitcoin helps with individual responsibility, like Bitcoin is a money which demands maximal individual responsibility. Like there's no Bitcoin hotline to call if you just sent your Bitcoin to the wrong address. Like there's no, oh, Mr. Satoshi, can you help me reverse the transaction? It doesn't work, right? Like it doesn't exist. If you forget a fucking digit and you send it to a non-address, it's gone. Adios. Like, see you later. There's no rewind button. And I've got a phrase in the new book, The Bushido of Bitcoin, where I say, if reality can be defined as that which cannot be rewound, then Bitcoin is the realest money we've ever had. Right. So there's no rewind button. There's no sort of like reversal. It is maximal responsibility. And what that does is it forces people, economically speaking, and remember, economics means human action. So human action is behavior. It's what you do. It forces people to, economically speaking, think twice about what they do. And thinking twice is taking more responsibility. It is thinking about what I'm doing before I do it. It means that I'm being more mature. It means that I'm being more of an adult. So all of these things are interrelated. So in many ways, like by forcing people to grow up economically speaking, people then, generally speaking, start to think about other areas in their life where they can take a little bit more responsibility and more onus. I don't believe individuals can ever become entirely sovereign. Obviously, like unless you're a king or unless you're Elon Musk, right? Like, and even those people don't have entire sovereignty, right? But what they can do is they can do their best to maximize autonomy. And I think there's a slight difference there, right? Like autonomy is achievable by an individual. Sovereignty, I don't think is. And when I was younger, I was flying the flag of sovereign individual, all this sort of shit. But I've kind of like grown up a little bit to understand that, hey, there's a limit to you know your capacity to be sovereign. But in any case, like Bitcoin increases the onus on oneself, and thus your autonomy. So yeah, yes, it does increase your freedom, but it also increases your responsibility. And in doing so, like you can almost think about actually autonomy as like a mixture of freedom and responsibility. It's sort of like a mixture of both. Um, it makes you be more responsible across all other areas. So that creates the kind of individual who is more sovereign, if we're going to use that as a synonym for autonomous.
Yeah, yeah. And it's down to the education as well of people and how much education they put into learning about Bitcoin. Because as we can see now, a lot of people are coming to Bitcoin and well with these ETFs and everything, they don't understand probably the difference probably between self-custody, having real Bitcoin, or else buying this like paper Bitcoin or this ETF. Yeah. So I think that's the whole educational field out there is opening up, and there's so much education. But for yourself, through the Bitcoin Times, right, and the education that you were doing there, you've provided some in-depth insights on Bitcoin. And how do you see Bitcoin education evolving? And what key lessons do you want to impart through this publication?
I mean, the publication is something I started in 2018 when I got invited to this conference to talk about blockchain. And I was like, Jesus Christ, these people are out of their minds. So I went and presented the case that blockchain is just a stupid buzzword, that what's important here is Bitcoin and blockchain insofar as it's uh, a technical ingredient in the broader Bitcoin recipe. It's important there, but outside of that context, it's just the stupidity. So that was I gave a talk and I had a lot more that I wanted to say in the talk, so we put it into this PDF that we gave it and we kind of printed it out in this like funny looking publication. It was like a little newspaper looking thing, and we gave it out and we had so much good feedback for that. And I thought, shit, maybe I can start something out of this. So the first Bitcoin Times is essentially a entirely written by me, and it's like this bashing of blockchain as a concept, as a major stupidity. And that sort of inspired me to then reach out a year later to a bunch of writers at the time who were relatively unknown. So it was Breedlove, Gigi, Nick Carter, Haas McCook, and a couple others. And like back then I think me, Gigi, and Breedlove had like 2,000 followers. Nick Carter was the big account with 10,000 followers, like so my how times have changed. But we all set out and we wrote the second edition of the Bitcoin Times, which is fantastic. And that kind of got the eyeballs on it. And then the third edition was the one that really sort of like got it out in the wild. And that was co-written with myself, with Parker Lewis, Jimmy Song, Alan Farrington. No, was Alan in that one? No, Alan Farrington was in the fourth. Um, Eric Case, and I think that there was a couple really, big names there, and that sort of like landed it in a big way. Then, we decided I decided effectively each year to do a new edition with a particular theme, with an invitation only to six writers, and we would produce one of these. Now, I'm actually handing the Bitcoin Times over to Knut Svanholm, who's the author of Everything Divided by 21 and a bunch of other books. And I'm in a sense going to sort of like partner with them because I've got too many other things going on. But the Bitcoin Times is an attempt at having a world-class Bitcoin only annual publication or a journal, I guess you could call it. So it's not really a magazine. It's the place where you would get one a year, and it's like the most high impact essay on a particular theme you could possibly imagine. So last year we did the energy edition. We had like Marty Bent, we had Brian Gitt, like we had these big names in the energy space where sort of energy meets Bitcoin. Write a bunch of really, really, really profound essays. Like Gideon Powell is one of the guys who's comes from a wildcatter family. Like they've been involved in oil in Houston for almost a century. And he wrote one of the most fantastic pieces on there, and he brought up a guy called Julian Simon, who's this physicist that makes the case that resources are infinite. The only thing that's finite is human ingenuity, because molecules don't go away. Like we have all the energy we could ever need. The limiting factor is our capacity to extract the energy or to transform the molecules that we have into energy. And when you look at sort of life in that way, you realize that we literally have no limits. Like it's abundance all the way, predicated by our capacity for ingenuity. So anyway, that's like there's a lot of ideas in this Bitcoin Times publication, or in the series of each one, that I think are extraordinarily profound. And not to blow smoke up my own ass, but I think it's the best Bitcoin publication in the world for that reason.
All right. And I hope people check that out. Yeah. And go in and sign up for it. Yeah. Because there's some good data points and some good information on that. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit maybe about what you're seeing, the likes of maybe adoption. You're traveling a lot around the world. We were talking earlier on that you're going to be going to a lot of conferences this year. Uh, what do you see as the biggest challenges do you think preventing Bitcoin for like a mass adoption? And how do initiatives like things that you've done before, like Amber and the Bitcoin Times, help to overcome those challenges?
I don't care about adoption anymore, honestly. I think it's just something that's going to come with time. There's no answer to
Hmm.
it. There's no way. It's like a string. You can't push a string, right? So like everyone will do things the like through the market process of people filling the demand for stuff like people hungry to learn. So therefore someone launches a publication or an educational course or something, a podcast, whatever, right? So the market need is filled. People want to buy some of this stuff. So they'll go out and they'll buy it on Coinbase or River or Swan or Amber or Relay or whatever the case is, right? So businesses will prop up to fill that need. And that's just going to keep happening. In terms of like Bitcoin itself, like no one's going to start using it for commerce in any significant way for at least another decade, maybe longer, because the thing is it's still maturing. It's still growing. And like you can't run a business when your cost of goods, when your input costs are in fiat, and then your sales are in this volatile currency. Now, it's volatile up and to the right, which is the direction we want it to be volatile in over time. But businesses don't operate on 4 year cycles. Businesses operate on a daily, weekly, monthly cycle. So it's impossible for a large number of businesses to start using Bitcoin and adopting it as a as a medium exchange and all this sort of stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that people can't. Like me, for example, personally, I don't care. When I launched the pre-sale for what do you call it? The Bushido of Bitcoin, I did that all on Geyser, which is a crowd fund denominated in Bitcoin. And I took all the money in Bitcoin and happy days. I'm fine with that because I value my time in the form of stats, not in the form of dollars. So I'm at a different stage. And maybe you are, maybe the people listening to this are, etc. And we're all going to be at different stages. You can almost like think of it as like, an army strung through the desert and like, they're all going through the desert. They're all going to come out to the other side, but there's people at different stages. There's some at the front of the line, there's some at the back of the line, some in the middle, and all this sort of stuff. So, people have to go through their own progression. They first have to treat it as a savings instrument. Then they can use it for spending. Then they might get to the point of considering it a unit of account. And money is all three things. Money can't just be one. Like you can't just have a money that is just the store of value. It doesn't fucking make sense. Like money has to perform all three functions. And Bitcoin does that very, very well. Um, the limiting factor is not Bitcoin. The limiting factor is human psychology and the necessary cultural and generational shifts that have to come. So I wrote an article about this about a year and a half ago now, maybe even 2 years ago. It was called the Three Generations Theory. And I recommend everyone look it up. Just type in Three Generations Theory Svetski in Google, and you'll find it. It was an article for Bitcoin Magazine where I made the case that Bitcoin's going to take 60 years to reach any level of significant mass adoption. So quit fucking rushing. Um, you know, it'll happen in time. And the thing is, Bitcoin's not for us. Bitcoin's for future generations. Like
Mhm.
people got to get that through their head. Like everyone just wants to be fucking rich, but that's just not the way it works.
Yeah, yeah. As I say, it's for the kids. It's for the future. Yeah, it'll help us now as we go along. But the big thing's going to happen in the future. Yeah, as you said, they're 10, 20, 30 years away. But like when I got into Bitcoin myself, I had a 4 year plan. Then I created into a 10 year plan. Now I'm actually looking out 100 years. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to plan for my kids, my grandkids, my great grandchildren. Yeah. And as we
Mhm.
said earlier, Bitcoin does changes us all. Yeah, we come for one idea that we think is going to help us, but it changes our whole life. Yeah, it's changed my whole life. Yeah, compared to what I was before. Yeah, what I've grown into now. Yeah. Let's touch a little bit on maybe Austrian economics. You're a strong proponent of Austrian economics. How has this school of thought shaped your views on Bitcoin and its potential to reshape global economics?
I mean, I think the Austrian School of Economics is the only viable school of economics. I think everything else is just nonsense that doesn't take into consideration uh the reality of existence, right? So the like all other schools of economics start with a bunch of like flawed hypotheses and then they extrapolate from there, right? Whereas Austrian economics just starts with praxeology, which is the study of human action. And if you start there, you have some axiomatic truths which cannot be disputed. So you have a strong foundation to start with. So it's like, man has ends and he uses means to meet those ends, right? Like so that's one of the axiomatic principles of Austrian economics. And another one is like two people can't be the owner of the same thing at the same fucking time. Like I can't have an apple and you have the same apple. That like that cannot exist. So there's a bunch of like basic principles that make Austrian economics very, very, very powerful because it's a very uh, sober and accurate representation of reality, right? And that's what you want with a study of economics because like the more accurate it is, the greater the degree of accuracy in your predictions. Because that's the whole point of having an economic model is so that you can try and like gauge the future. So if you just fucking lie to yourself and create an economic model that is just made up on fairy tales, you're going to miss. And that's essentially what the modern world is at the moment. It's just a bunch of fucking fairy tales with a bunch of bureaucrats and idiots telling themselves that, oh yeah, there's no such thing as gravity, blah blah blah. There's no weeds, there's no weeds, there's no weeds, and they just ignore shit. It's like, they'll go and take things like the price of energy and the price of food out of their calculations for inflation. Like absolute idiocy. Like the level of stupidity is like comical at this point. It's like you're watching a show, but that's what these people are. They've confused the reason for doing economics with like the scorecard, right? Like they think that passing a test means getting the scorecard and just writing A everywhere, right? Like, no, you idiot. Like the point of passing the test is to actually show that you have the knowledge in the first place. So for me, Austrian economics is like the only viable, rational, functional form of economics because it is the one that uh, starts with a rooting in praxeological truth and then extends from there. Now, the challenge is we live in a world surrounded by idiots who don't understand that, who, they prefer to like live in fairyland. So, sometimes it makes things like Austrian economics fringe, which is such a shame, right? It's like the reality is fringe and the fantasy is, mainstream. But it is what it is. But if you can understand those principles, you can very quickly come to understand why Bitcoin is so profound and so important.
Yeah, yeah. And I was only looking at something this morning, okay, an interview on, I think, one of the UK news channels, and they had a guy on there talking about money. And like he was just talking about spending, 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 and spending and more spending. And when the interviewer asked him, okay, well, we understand you want to spend more, but sure, where are you going to get this money? He said, well, sure, we can just print it. We can just make it. And like, from us looking at that, we know when they make more money, it makes everybody poorer. Yeah. But the general public, most people don't understand that. Yeah. And they haven't taken the time to learn about that. But like, just madness and nonsense, what they're talking about. Yeah. And we can see the whole of Europe now, where we are and the mess that we're in with all these crazy ideology and everything that's happening around us. Yeah. Uh, Ireland as well. We're not in a good place over here with what's going on here in Ireland. Yeah.
Yep.
But as I say, we need to just learn for ourselves and try and protect our families now because these policy uh, makers that are in that claim to be looking after us, they're actually doing more damage to us and doing more damage to the countries and the people. So I don't even know if it can if we have a change of government because people that have done their work realize that it's not the government that's doing everything, it's the people that's behind the government that's controlling everything. Yeah. So I think people need to level up and as you were pointing out there, start learning for themselves and take control of their own lives and take responsibility for themselves and don't wait for these policymakers to try and save us because they ain't. They're just coming in to wreck us,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, intentionally or unintentionally, it doesn't matter. The outcome is the same when you believe in fucking fairy tales, and that's the problem here.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so looking ahead from yourself, yeah, regarding Bitcoin, yeah, and we're not talking about the price, but say in 10, 20 years' time, where do you see uh it being, and do you believe it'll be a dominant force for human freedom? And we know it's a lot of hope for us, yeah, people that have done their work, but what about people that aren't in tune to Bitcoin? They haven't done as much work as ourselves on Bitcoin and understand what it is for the future and how it's going to help us. Um, do you see it as
Um,
dominant force for human freedom? And is it still, or are they still, and we know there is still significant hurdles ahead of us, but where do you see us going?
I mean, the world's gonna continually, sorry, the world's gonna increasingly bifurcate. So I call it the split between Homo Bitcoinicus and Homo Hystericus. On the one hand, you'll have people who I think a key ingredient will be holding and understanding Bitcoin, but there'll be all sorts of other things, which is why I wrote the Bushido of Bitcoin. So they'll start to like realize that there is virtues and ways of being that are necessary to build a strong civilization, strong communities, strong society, and all this sort of stuff. So there'll be those kind of people, and other characteristics is that they will try and be potentially location agnostic, or they will have particular values. They will have like that they'll be the ones. Getting sunshine, touching grass, eating real food, etc. Right? So like you got that sort of camp, then the other camp is the ones that are continually going to believe that the government's going to save them, that Kamala Harris is their savior, or that fiat money is the answer, that CBDCs, we should have it because we can control society more. Like those morons are going to be on the other side. And the world's going to, as I said, increasingly bifurcate, where we almost like become two different species. And in time, the idiot species, the Homo hystericus, will probably obsolete themselves, just like prior species did, because they're just dumb. They're going to lose their fertility. They're going to become economically destitute. Poverty will reign free, all that sort of stuff. So, in fact, I've actually in in the Bushido Bitcoin at the end, there's the last part of the book is called Visions of the Future, and I do a little bit of like sort of abstract guidance on like this is what I think the future is gonna sort of trend towards, but then I say, look, instead of me explaining it to you, let me paint a picture. And what I do is I wrote a short story. So it's about a 6,000 word short story on the year 2084, what the world looks like at that point. So it's block number 4,025,000, I think it was. And I, yeah, basically it's the story of a smuggler traveling between what I call the executive states, which are these new states that are effectively that operate on a Bitcoin standard, and him going into the old world, which I call like the UN, um, and how he's got to like uh, transport contraband from the new world to the old world, all this sort of stuff. And I use that story to paint a vivid picture of like what the world will look like or might look like in the future based on all of this. So I don't want to give too much of the story away, but yeah, I think the fundamental theme there is that there will be an increasingly large bifurcation between people, between uh, the kinds of person that are uh, either repelled by Bitcoin or attracted to it.
Nice, nice. That's going to be an interesting read. And when will people be able to get access to the book? And how can people go and pre-order it or pre-book it, or how does it work now?
Yeah, so they can pre-order it still. It'll be available on Amazon next month. So if they go to bushidoofbitcoin.com, they will be able to, depends when they get there. So if it's still on pre-order, bushidoofbitcoin.com has two ways to pre-order on Kickstarter or on Geyser. Geyser is in Bitcoin, obviously Kickstarter is in dollars. Or if depending on whether you hear this episode, if it's in November, most likely it'll be available on Amazon, and the link will be there on Bushido of Bitcoin.com as well. Bushido.
Amazing, amazing. And Alexander, for the future, what holds the future for yourself? Yeah, what's your plans for the next year? You're doing a lot of traveling, you were saying.
Yes, I mean we're building Atlantis, which is the, as I said, the social network for sovereign individuals. It's a place where whether it's nomads, frequent travelers, Bitcoiners, parallel economies, circular economies, all this sort of stuff, can build community. So it's almost like imagine like Instagram meets Google Places meets Meetup.com, TripAdvisor, and like Nomad List sort of all in one. So you've got kind of elements of each. And yeah, that's like that's going to be my primary vocation. And then personally speaking, I'll obviously keep pushing the Bushido of Bitcoin. And I've got there's some addendums to the book. I think I'm going to end up making it a series of books, similar to what Taleb did with Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, Better Procrasties and stuff like that. So I think I'm going to do like like a Bushido of Bitcoin series where the next book will be called The Metaphysics of War and Beauty, which is it's a section from the first book that I had to rip out because the first book got too long. So this will go into a second book, and I'll elaborate on that. And then in the future there'll be some other things. I might even look at doing a series of fiction books that kind of extend on the story of 2084. So we'll see. That'll definitely come later. But for the next year, everything is about Bushido and about Atlantis. So that's my focus. I've cut everything else out of my life.
Okay, amazing, amazing. And you'll probably be going out to a few conferences as well. And if you're around, where's your next couple of conferences where people can link up with you and have a chat with you?
The next three will all be Latin America, so Brazil, Argentina, Salvador, Colombia, like all of that. So it'll be this side, and then probably in the summer I'll be back in Europe.
Yeah. Happy days, happy days. You might see in Ireland for the Bitcoin Ireland conference. I'm the co-founder of the event, and we can talk about that's in May, maybe, if you're
In
around.
May next year? Yeah,
May of next
possibly.
year, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
there's
on.
a chance I might be able to make that actually.
Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, so we'll link all the descriptions to all your work in the description below. And it was nice talking to you, and we will catch up soon. Yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend. Really appreciate it.
thank you.